Welcome back to Umineko. In the last episode, we had a crazy revelation. About half the family is now dead. I wish I were lying. All the interesting characters are dead too, so I'm sorry to say. Okay, that's not technically true, but uh, we lost some good ones. We lost some good ones.
倒れているのはクラウスおじさん、ルドルフおじさん、キリエおばさんにローザおばさん、ゴーダさんで5人。
いや、6人や。ここにもう一人おる。
Oh no. The body Hideyoshi was looking down on now happened to be hidden among the shadows in that mountain range of objects. A blind spot to George, who stood by the entrance. But George couldn't tell whose body it was. So George cursed himself, cursed the fact that his worst guesses always turned out to be right.
じゃあ、お父さんの足元に倒れているのはシャノンなんだね。
ああ、シャノンちゃんや。
George felt completely silent. He shook slightly, his lower lip trembling. Normally, he wouldn't have wanted to run his beloved's body, screaming and crying. However, before rashly rushing forward, he worked to keep his composure. He asked his father.
シャノンもクラウスおじさんたちと同じなのかな。
Hideyoshi deeply understood the meaning of those words, though he couldn't give George an immediate answer. Rather, he felt that silence was the only sincere and loving response he could give George right now. George asked if Shannon was the same. He meant to ask whether her corpse was in the same condition as the others or not. Since Hideyoshi hadn't denied it, it meant her corpse was in the same brutal state.
シャノンを見てもいいかな。
いや、あかん。
I don't know if I'd want to.
だって
I don't think I could do it.
もう二度とシャノンの顔を見られないんだよ。その最後の顔、どうして見たらいけないんだよ。
お前が最後にシャノンちゃんに会ったのは昨日か。
うん。
そうか。そのシャノンちゃんは別れ際にお前にどんな顔を見せたんや。
素敵な笑顔だったよ。
After he handed her the ring, she hesitated, even though she must have already made up her mind. Then she looked bashful and ran away because she was embarrassed to let him see her face looking like that. That's the expression that was revived in George's mind.
そうか。ならシャノンちゃんもその笑顔をお前に残したいと願うはずや。
See, that's where I'm at. I couldn't taint my memory so badly. Hideyoshi looked down upon Shannon's body lying at his feet. Just like the other bodies, it was in such a horrible state that make anyone want to cover their eyes. Her head had been smashed in from the side, and no more than half of her expression remained. The remaining blood-soaked half of her expression had been wiped clean. The graceful smile of hers peeked out, but only half of it. Without thinking, Hideyoshi slapped his hands over his eyes. If her face was going to be crushed anyway, then if only all of it had been crushed. Might have been able to temporarily distract George from his pain by making the pathetic suggestion that it was someone else wearing Shannon's clothes. Half of her face had been left untouched. It caused the body so much humiliation while still proving beyond doubt that the body was Shannon's and no one else's. How brutish. There, trying his best to burn the image of the remaining half of Shannon's expression into his eyes as she laid at Hideyoshi's feet, was Cannon. Cannon was not crying. Tears had risen to his eyes, but they did not drip down. That didn't mean he wasn't feeling as much sadness as everyone else. Losing Shannon, who had lived with him in the same orphanage, whom he had loved as a sister. Must have been the same as losing a blood relative. I mean, yeah, when you think
ジ
about
ョー
it.
ジ、シャノンちゃんはきっとありがとう言うてるぞ。お前に恥ずかしいところを見られとうなかったんや。きっとお前が耐えてくれたこと、感謝しとるで。
わかってる。わかってるよ、父さん。わかってるよ。
George leaned against the outside wall of the storehouse, crouching down limply.
父さん、頼みがあるんだ。
なんや。
僕の代わりに見てほしいんだ。シャノンは指に
The
指輪を
ring!
つけてるかな。
指輪
She wore the ring, that means she accepted. Hideyoshi crouched down. As she did, Cannon slyly pointed to one of Shannon's hands.
ああ、あるで。これはダイヤの指輪や。クズダイヤとちゃう。なかなかの値打ちもんや。
それはどっちの手のどの指にあるのかな。
と、左手の薬指や。そっか。
Nice.
シャノンちゃん、婚約しとったんか。
ジョージ、あなた、まさか。
エヴァ、今はそんなん関係ないで。
Yeah, it really
シャ
doesn't
ノンちゃ
matter
んは
now.
男に将来を約束されとったんや。一生を幸せにしちゃると男に言わせたんや。それが誰かは問題とちゃうで。男にそこまで言わしめて女の本懐やないか。いつこの指輪をもらったんかは知らん。誰が渡したかも知らん。だがそれでもシャノンちゃんは指輪をもらえたんや。そしてそれを受け入れ、左の薬指に通したんや。指輪を送った男もきっと喜んだんとちゃうか。
Most of the people there, Hideyoshi was simply disturbed by this extraordinary situation and was blurting out strange things. However, someone who knew of George and Shannon's true relationship would understand the full meaning of those words.
そっか。ありがとう、父さん。
George stood up. Traces of tears still streaked his face, but his expression had returned to its usual calm one.
行こう。バトラ君、ジェシカちゃん。これ以上、僕たちがここにいると、大人の邪魔になる。
そうだな。
Jessica sniffled once, showing her face to her mother, who had been holding her the whole time. Let her know she was okay now. When she faced George again, she once again had her on her usual expression, although she still couldn't smile.
バトラー、しっかり。
Adler kept on crouching in front of his parents' bodies. Yeah, he lost both of his parents.
がっつり泣いたら落ち着いたぜ。
Rough.
親父の野郎。普段はクソクソ言ってるくせに、ちょっと死んじまったくらいでピーピー泣くんじゃねえぜって、笑ってやがれ。仕方ねえだろ。親が死んだら泣くように。遺伝子すり込まれちまってんだからよ。
Adler's face was still bright red from the tears. He had at least recovered enough to fake a smile, if only a bitter one.
カノン、お前もこれ以上ここにいてはいけません。子供たちを連れてお屋敷に戻っていなさい。
Tsui had been standing out of the rain this whole time, unable to take a step into the storehouse. Maybe she had her own way of grieving, different from Battler's. Realizing that she had to take on the role of responsibility now that her husband was dead, she gave Cannon those orders.
はい、奥様。
Cannon rose silently and turned to face me. His face was pure white, almost as though his own heart had died along with Shannon. And there was no life in his expression. On an ordinary day, if he'd been told to guide the children through the beautiful rose garden, Cannon might have led the way. But now there was no distinction between Cannon and the children. They were now just kids of about the same age, suffering the pain of losing those close to them. And making sure that the children were leaving, Natsui started giving orders to Genji.
現地すぐに警察に連絡しなさい。台風が通り過ぎるまでは来られないでしょうが、どうすればいいか指示を与えてくれるはずです。
わかりました。防災用の無線機がありますので、それで連絡します。
When she heard that, Natsui remembered. That's right, the phones were out today, weren't they? However, they also had a radio, since they couldn't necessarily rely on phones all the time while living on an isolated island. At any rate, they should start by contacting the police and receiving their instructions. Everything else could wait.
南條先生、もうこの場はどうしようもありませんか。
残念ながら私には何もできませんな。
わかりました。源氏、せめて主人たちの顔を何かで覆ってやることはできませんか。このような姿を晒すことは当人にとっても屈辱的でしょうから。
はい。
Genji picked up several dried up towels from inside the storehouse.
ち
Even
ょ
when
っとちょっと、
oh,
お待ちなさいよ。こ
ah,
こは犯行現場なんでしょ。なら変に手を加えちゃダメよ。私たちは混乱してて現場に土足で踏み入っちゃったけど、それはきっと警察の捜査の邪
oh,
魔になったわ
that's a
よ。
good point. Could be an issue. That's what guarded Ava offended. Objectively speaking, Ava was right. Even so, she guarded Ava as though accusing her of refusing to do the tragic corpses, to being humiliated even after death. Simple kindness of covering their faces. However, Ava had spoken both calmly and correctly. The horrible situation definitely wasn't an accident. It was a crime. Someone had killed them. Murder case. They needed to be careful to avoid disturbing the site any further.
私もエヴァさんに賛成ですな。警察が来るまでここは手つかずにしておくべきです。
奥様、いかがなさいますか。
そうですね。わかりました。ここを閉ざしなさい。それから念のためここに別の施錠をするように。
別の施錠？
ええ、ここに来た時シャッターの鍵は閉じていました。ということはシャッターの鍵を使い犯人が施錠したということです。
確かに通りや。じゃあここを開けた限り犯人の指紋が残ってるんとちゃうんか。
警察に証拠として提出する価値はあるでしょうけど、カノン君が普通に持ってここを開けるのに使用しちゃったわ。多分
Oh,
指
yeah.
紋も付着しちゃってるわよ。そしてその鍵はさっき源氏さんに手渡され、源氏さんも素手で受け取ってる。大した証拠にはなりそうにないわね。
それは不用心でした。申し訳ございません。
源氏さん、この倉庫の鍵は他にもあるんか？
いいえ、この一つだけです。
ということは犯人はその鍵を使用人室から持ち出し、そして律儀に元の場所に戻したちゅうことになるな。
Hideyoshi's theory sounded plausible, but was actually very strange if you thought about it. Why would they go to all the trouble of returning a key that they stole? Now, if you think about it even more deeply, there are some points that are even more bizarre. When a criminal hides a body, they're usually trying to delay the point at which it'll be found so they can use that time to escape. The six weren't necessarily killed here, but it was reasonable to assume that they were killed somewhere on this island, carried to the storehouse, and hidden to delay the discovery of the crime. So why would they have the key? Why wouldn't they just keep the key? And yet, the eerie magic circle scribbled on the storehouse shutter had eloquently indicated the location of the hidden corpses. Sure, it didn't explicitly mention the corpses, but 6 people had gone missing. In that situation, someone had made such an obvious piece of graffiti and even returned the key to the shutter. Almost as though they wanted the corpses here to be discovered. Anyway, we can't put all our faith in a lock the culprit had opened once before.
とにかく一度は犯人が開け閉めをした施錠だけでは信用できません。犯人の手からもこの場所を保護する意味で施錠を新たにしたいと言っているのです。
いい案だと思います。私も賛成です。
Genji fished around inside the storehouse and unsealed a brand new padlock that had been inside a small box.
鍵はどうなさいますか？
私が持ちましょう。責任を持って警察に手渡します。
Not so he took the key to the padlock from Genji's hand. After that, they all exited and lowered the shutter. And so the corpses were once again sealed behind that shutter, which was still covered with that creepy magic sword. Genji crouched down in front of the shutter to fasten the new padlock. Shutters often have a place in front where you can attach your own lock in addition to the main lock of the shutter. This was one of those types. In the midst of the roar of thunder and the pouring rain, the storehouse stood there ominously. With its closed shutters still covered in blood-like, creepy substance, swallowed up the bodies of the sick. Funatsu, putting the new lock on wasn't mainly to preserve the scene for the police. She might have felt like she wanted to shut that mouth for all eternity. Prevent that eerie beast from swallowing up any more victims.
さあ、行きましょう。皆さん、南條先生。ご足労をありがとうございました。現時は急いで警察に連絡を。
戻りましたらすぐに連絡。
This is getting good. I don't know about you, but the adults left the storehouse. The ghastly magic circle drawn on the shutter kept the 6 bodies in his throat. Looming eerily as the lightning occasionally lit it up. All that could be heard was the sound of the rain, the voices from the kids' TV program Maria was watching, and the engrossed Maria's cackling voice. In other words, what greeted them as they returned dumbfounded from that horrible, bizarre scene was the voice of Maria as she rolled around laughing at the television. Those who returned to the room didn't know how to explain to Maria that her mother was dead and were trapped by a suffocating silence. Yeah, how do you break this news? At first, Maria returned those stares with a dubious look. Realized they weren't trying to blame her for anything, she ignored them and again immersed herself in the television program. Children wordlessly sat down heavily on the sofa. Their minds were probably blank from their state of shock. Everyone had already cried and mourned so much, but now they just vaguely sat there, faces seeming to have lost all emotion. Only Kennen had returned to his usual calm expression. However, that probably didn't mean he'd been able to wipe out the shock. Nothing was reflected in his eyes as he stared into empty space. Hideyoshi kept on fidgeting, and every time he remembered that horrible scene, he started muttering about how he couldn't believe it, how it couldn't have been something from this world. It must have been the work of demons. Every now and then, his mutterings produced a question directed at Nanjo. But the latter kept repeating in a calm, doctor-like manner that could be understood by only glancing at the scene. That until the police arrived, they wouldn't learn anything. However, Nanjo only appeared calm next to Hideyoshi, who simply couldn't suppress his agitation and fear. In fact, Nanjo had also received a huge shock, and his face was deathly pale. Maybe the atmosphere was why she tried to rise to the challenge and take charge. Natsui appeared to be unchanged from her normal attitude. She briskly gave directions.
私はお父様のところへ行ってきます。現時は急ぎ警察へ連絡を。
かしこまりました。
私も一緒させていただいていいかしら、夏日姉さん。クラウス兄さんがいなくなった以上、お父様の補佐は私の仕事だもの。その私が夏日姉さんに任せっきりで、ここでくつろいでいるわけにはいかないわ。
I thought he was struck speechless by Ava's aggressive move in a situation like this. Seemed to be claiming that with Kraus dead, the one to take responsibility should be his wife. Nah. But herself, the next highly ranked in the family. Maybe she hadn't been all that happy when Natsui took command without her in such an extreme situation. You can put the petty squabbles aside, right? However, Ava's mind had been blank from shock until just a moment ago. She only came to her senses after Natsui started giving orders. Like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be a bitch. Natsui started walking around without saying a word more. Ava followed behind her. Whatever, come with me. As they did, Kumasawa-san ran into the parlor. She wasn't usually the kind of person to run around, so under normal circumstances, most people would have taken her entrance as a sign that something was the matter. But because everyone was still stricken with shock, they hardly even noticed her.
奥様夏日姉さんならお父さんのところへ行ったで。すぐ戻ってくるやろ。
What
ど
now?
ないしたんや、熊沢さん。
それが食堂に血が
The dining hall. Blood. Blood. Everyone thought the same thing. I hope I misheard that. Any container can only hold so much. No one here would have been capable of handling yet another tragedy. So they all thought it. I hope I misheard that.
なんやて？食堂？
朝食の準備に食堂に配膳に行ったら
First one to start running was George. Harsh footsteps jogged Hideyoshi and Nanjo to their senses, and they chased after him. Battler and the others followed. They flew into the dining hall one after another, but they didn't find any change that might have caused Kumasawa to go pale. Those who had viewed that gruesome scene in the storehouse, it was a bit of an anticlimax. However, Kumasawa, who had followed them, pointed it out. There really were some traces of blood remaining on the floor. Compared to that terrible scene, it wasn't very impressive. You're like, hey, you should check out the storehouse, this is nothing. However, if you calmly thought about it, this definitely indicated the loss of a lot of blood.
ここにも血だまりがあるよ。
Well, whose is it?
これは一体。
だいぶ時間が経っているように見えますな。おそらく昨べここで殺されたんだと見ていいでしょう。
そういうことになるんやろな。わしらは昨べずっと食堂で話し合いをしとった。そしてここに何者かが押し入ったに違いない。
父さんたちが打ち合わせを抜けて休んだのは何時だっけ？
昨夜の24時を少し過ぎたくらいの頃や。だからその後にと考えるんが妥当やろな。
マジかよ。勘弁してくれよ。お嬢様、しっかり。
俺はもうさっきの倉庫でこの世の地獄ってやつを拝んじまったから、今さらこのくらいじゃ答えねえぜ。
そうかよ。よかったな。私は頭がどうにかなっちまいそうだぜ。ここは食堂だぜ。私は毎日ここで食事をして、学校のことをぼやいたり、宿題のことをぼやいたり、親父に学校の成績の話をされたり、そういうところなんだぜ。お嬢様、これ以上ここにいるのはよくありません。100万へ戻りましょう。
俺も同感さ。秀吉おじさん、この部屋は多分警察にとって重要な意味があると思います。俺たちが踏み荒らしちまうのはまずいんじゃないですか。
Nana proposes in a slightly firm voice as, along with Cannon, he grabs the pale and shaking Jessica's shoulders.
バトラさんの言う通りですな。この部屋にこれ以上好んで居続けることはありますまい。
Nanjo spoke looking at everyone's pale faces. No, that horrible scene in the storehouse felt like something not of this world. Then we'd be able to leave, to cut ourselves off from that place and run away. Everyone had shared in that feeling. However, this dining hall was different. It was in the mansion, main building on the estate. And as Jessica had said, it should have been one of the most calming places even inside the mansion. It was where all the relatives had eaten lunch and dinner yesterday. The shock of seeing this place smeared with blood reminded us of that horrible spectacle in the storehouse. Forced us to accept that we hadn't really been able to run away from the scene of the tragedy.
わしも同感や。この部屋には犯人の痕跡が残ってるかもわからんしな。素人のわしらがかき回すべきとちゃうで。はよ出るんや。はよはよ。
Hideyoshi also understood the meaning of what Battler had said and pushed everyone to hurry out of the dining hall. It is now a crime scene. The way we were then, looking at that blood any longer would have been too harsh. Nobody went against his words. Everyone raced each other out of the dining hall. It was almost as if the last person in the room would be trapped in there, all alone. Once inside the hallway, we went to hand to Kumasawa, who was still trembling and leaning. And we all headed back to the parlor together. Then Genji returned.
お、源氏さん。
Good
警察
news?
に連絡はつきましたか。
それが申し訳ございませ
Are
ん。
you serious?
無線機の故障か、それ以外の理由によるものかわかりませんが。
なんや、警察に連絡がつかんのか。電話も無線もどっちもダメなんか。
申し訳ございません。月曜の朝に船が来ることになっていますので、その船の通信機を借りることができると思います。
Tomorrow.
この島には船はないんか。新島の警察署までちょっくら行ってくることはできんのか。
秀吉さん、この天気では無理だ。少なくとも台風が通り過ぎるまではどうにもなりません。
Does the boat not have communications equipment that we could use?
修理中で島にございません。
Oh, it's Krause's
ですの
boat.
で、月曜の船を
Of course it's not.
ないか。
Oh my god.
そんなアホな話があるか。
Don't like all boats have like communication equipment?
電話も無線も通じず、船もない。台風が過ぎて船
Maybe
が
I'm
来るま
just
で。
being
つ
naive,
まり
but
明日の朝までわしらは警察にも連絡できず。
I mean the boat's not here anyway, so it doesn't
この島
matter.
におれん
But
ちゅうことなんか。
that's crazy.
ってことはつまり俺たちだけじゃなくおじさんたちを殺した犯人もこの島から出られず足止めってことだな。そういうことになるね。みんなを殺した犯人は
And they couldn't have left.
まだこの島にいる。
親父たちを殺した奴はこの島から逃げ出せずまだ潜んでやがるってことかよ。くそくそくそくそ、見つけ出してやるぜ。警察になんか引き渡すもんか。私がこの手でやっ先にしてやる。
It could be her. I need to be sexist. Marie had finally realized that something odd was happening in the parlor. Rather than noticing something odd, probably better to say she felt unhappy and neglected, since everyone was getting so excited about something only she didn't know about.
ジェシカお姉ちゃん、誰か死んじゃったの？
The way she spoke was completely calm, just as though she was talking about someone who had appeared on a television drama, as though it was someone else's problem. Jessica probably didn't like that, As though trying to say, can't you just tell by looking at me overwhelmed with grief? Glared at Maria.
死んじまったぜ。みんな私の親父もトトラの父さんと母さんも幸田さんもシャノンもそしてマリアの母さんも。
よすんだジェシカちゃん。悲しいのは君だけじゃない。
マリアさん、ショックだろうが聞いてください。あなたのお母さんがな、死んでしまいました。
ママが死んじゃった？
ああ。誰かに
Something tells me that Maria didn't like her mom much
悲しいだろう
anyway.
ね。心をしっかり。
Very nonchalant about this whole thing.
死んじゃった？
6人だぜ。6人だ。くそあんな残酷なことしやがって。踊ってもんがあるだろうがよ。人間ならよ。誰だか知らねえが犯人は人間じゃねえぜ。血の色が赤いわけがねえ。
犯人は人間じゃない。鍵が選んだ生贄なだけ。
え、おい、マリア、今なんて言った？
Maria just said something, but since the words were so remotely separated from the flow and context of the conversation, I couldn't understand them for a second. I tried to ask her to repeat it again. I was shocked by the sudden sound of Aunt Natsui's loud voice coming from the entrance of the parlor. Looked like Aunt Natsui and Aunt Ava returned from the trip to see grandfather. Oh yeah, how'd that go?
無線でも連絡できない？こんな時に使えなくて何のための防災無線ですか？
申し訳ございません。
Thanks, break.
毎年保守点検はさせているはずなのですが。
ほら、光をチカチカさせるみたいな船舶信号ってあるじゃない？そういうので向こうの島に連絡することはできないのかしら？
そのような設備はございません。申し訳ございません。
I have no idea where you got that fabulous idea that we have that. Listen to Kumasawa, right? Pushing a serving cart loaded with breakfast. There was nobody would be able to eat in the dining hall, obviously. Hideyoshi had to order her to take it to the.
なぜ朝食をこちらに？
Oh yeah,
夏木さん、
you haven't
それ
heard.
は後で話す。それよりエヴァ、お父さんはどうなんや？
ご一緒でないところを見ると、このような事態になっても部屋から出ませんか。
That old bastard ever gonna leave?
いないわ。部屋は空っぽだったのよ。
なんやて？こんな時にどこ行ったんや？
親方様が書斎を出られたというのですか？
そうです。私も驚いています。いつの間に部屋を出たのやら。あなたたちに心当たりはないのですか？
That's why I looked at Genji and Kanan as she said this. Maybe she was trying to ask whether the servants who stepped directly under the one-winged eagle knew of a place he might go. However, it was probably the other way around. Their faces made it clear that those who knew Kinzo best realized even more than the rest how impossible it was for him to leave that room.
僕たちにも見当がつきません。
ご存知の通り、親方様はあの書斎の中に、お休みの場所からご不浄まで全てを設けさせました。親方様があの部屋をお出になることなど、よっぽどのことがない限り考えられません。
となると、なんや、そのよっぽどのことがあったって考えるのが自然だっちゅうことになるんか。
まだそうと決まったわけではありません。とにかく気まぐれな方ですから。現状をご存知なく、お一人で散歩をされている可能性もあります。仮にそうだとしたら、一刻も早く現状をお知らせして、ご指示を仰がねばなりません。
そうね。考えたくはないけど。お父様の身に何かあったかもし
Ava's
れない
happy. That
し
means
ね。
she's in charge.
そのような不吉なことは考えたくもありません。
I would have taken Kinza since the discovery of those 6 terrible corpses. On top of that, the phones were broken, the radio wouldn't reach anyone, and there was no way to contact the police. Apparently, the typhoon would leave tomorrow, and a boat would come. But until then, no one could rely on anyone outside the island, nor could they escape the island. Tragedy ended everyone so abruptly that they all lost their composure. Everyone felt a heavy silence. Everyone was impatient. Even though they needed to do something, they couldn't think of anything. So some of them held their heads in their arms while the others got irritated. Yeah, what do you do? Right now, no one could explain what was occurring on this island, Rokkenjima. Alrighty, well that's gonna do it for this part. It's gonna be a shorter part than usual because it was a long day and I'm tired. So I apologize. I'll see you again on Friday, and I might do an extra long part just to make up for it. So keep on the watch for that. So hope you all have a good day, everybody, and as always, take care. Goodbye.